Uh, he really did a great job holding his faith, it seems, through most of his life. I mean, he truly went through some difficult situations and held on to that faith in God. Uh, Not the least of which, being taken into captivity into a strange country and knowing that his people were being killed, and also him being a man of God, knowing that what was happening to his people was brought on them by themselves, and that's got to make it doubly hard, doesn't it? That you know that you hate to see your people suffer, but then also knowing that this is God's justice, that God said that if you didn't turn back to me, that this was what was going to happen. And so I think Daniel knew all those things. And so we start in verse 1 of chapter 2, after Daniel has, I think one of the most important things in chapter 1 was that Daniel resolved in his heart that he was going to serve God, that he would not eat the food, that he would have to live in this foreign country, that he would have to deal with life there, and he would have to make some kinds of compromises in his personal life, but that he wouldn't make compromises in his spiritual life. That's where I think that we kind of get that balance messed up sometimes. That we're not willing to make personal sacrifices, but we are willing to make spiritual sacrifices. And Daniel had this straight. So he was willing to make these personal sacrifices, and he did not like it. Hey, Miss Amy, come in.
Thank you, preacher.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Glad you're here. Barely got started. So Daniel was willing to make the personal sacrifices for himself, the things that he hated, the things knowing that he hated losing his freedom, that he hated losing his home, that he hated going and living in this foreign country among these people who didn't serve God. It made his life, it wasn't what he wanted, right? But he was willing to make those sacrifices, living in a place that he knew he didn't belong. He would never have felt like he belonged in Babylon, and that is true. And I think there's such a parallel here with Daniel living in this foreign country to us feeling like we're living in a foreign country, that we don't belong here, that we're peculiar, that we're different, that we want to serve God and we want to see the world act in a different way, and we want to see people serving God, and we want to see the moral values that our God upholds. And so very often we do feel like that we are being taken captive into this pagan country, in this pagan Babylon. And this is a great example of a man who was in that situation literally and kept his faith in God. And so we say that the Bible says in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. And so just to make a quick, in case anybody is doing the math, Daniel has done his 3 years, and so it says the second year of Nebuchadnezzar. But what I've seen is that the Babylonians did not count the king's first year as a year of leadership. They just didn't count it. It was like it was a trial period, maybe what we would call it, and so they didn't count that first year. So this ends up being really his third year, and so Daniel has come through, and you'll see that in Jeremiah too. Jeremiah uses the Hebrews way of counting time, and so it's interesting that Daniel here has been integrated somewhat into the Babylonian society. He was young, he was educated there. He's using some of their ways of keeping time. Again, very interesting that he is able to keep this balance, that keeps separate the education, the Babylonian education, the Babylonian culture from his spiritual walk with the Lord. I think it's something really to think about, and it's something for us to think about, is learning how to keep that line in our lives between being in the world but not of the world. And so in Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherein his spirit was troubled and his sleep brake from him. And so oftentimes we do think that God would only work in the lives of his people, in the lives of Christians, in the lives of the Israelite people. Actually, Israel had fallen away and was taken captive because they were not serving him. And very often God's own church, even now, is not serving him in the way that it should. And I speak of the church as a whole. And so it's what we probably ought to we need to get from this is that God is not just the God of the Christian people. He's not just the God of the Israelite people. He's not just the God of the church. He's not just our God. And that's what the world would have us to concede, is this idea that, well, you can have your God, but he's not our God. And not only that, but they want us to go along with that. That we're willing to compromise the idea and say, yeah, well, maybe that's true. Maybe he is just our God, and you're welcome to your God. But y'all, we can't do that as Christians. That's not what the Bible teaches us to do. And the truth is that God, the one true God, is the God of all peoples. He's the God of the Gentiles. He's the God of the lost. He's the God of the Hindus. He's the God of the Muslims. He is Lord over everybody, whether they like it or not, whether they recognize it or not. And he's making Nebuchadnezzar dream a dream. And he wants Nebuchadnezzar to know what's going to happen, so he gives him a dream. It's very interesting to me because he doesn't just speak to you and me. God will speak to people out there that we wouldn't think he would speak to, right? Sometimes you might have somebody come to you that you know does not live a Christian life, and suddenly they come to you and they're distraught over something. Something has shook something loose in their mind. God has shook something loose in their mind, and they can't get past it. I've had that happen several times. God is speaking to that person. Do not discount that God speaks to the lost. That's how he got us saved, isn't it? And so he speaks to Nebuchadnezzar and makes him dream a dream. And the king commanded to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. So it's interesting, again, some interesting things. He just got through saying, just in his first year, he had Daniel and Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah, and he just said, the same king just said that these four were 10 times better than all the others. And they didn't get called. He called his regular bunch, the older crowd, the ones that were not the Hebrew children, even though they were 10 times better at being advisors. They were 10 times smarter and 10 times wiser. And he admits that. But he calls together his team, his advisors, the normal magicians and astrologers and sorcerers and Chaldeans. It is interesting that the world sometimes, they want to leave us out a lot of times. And it's surprising, but I have found that many times the world knows that the Christians have the answers, but they don't want to hear the answers. So they leave us out, right? I think very possibly that this is the deal with Nebuchadnezzar. He knew they were 10 times better, but he's not. And there's some politics here too. The old crowd had been there a while and they were established, and they didn't want the Hebrew children around, so they were probably suppressing. Anyway, they weren't there. His normal crowd were come, and he said, and so the king said to him, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. I don't know. I dream dreams sometimes, and most of the time my spirit is not troubled to know what it means. It's just a dream, right? But occasionally I dream a dream and I think, something about that dream was a little different. I don't know. I'm not saying that God sent me a dream and I need to have it interpreted, but I have felt that feeling before. And so King Nebuchadnezzar had this dream and his spirit was troubled. He said, my spirit is troubled. Again, some things that the world speaks and they don't realize that they are. And we'll hear that ourselves. I mean, I've heard people who claim to be atheists say things that are just not atheist things to say. Things like, I've got a spirit, that my spirit is troubled within me. Well, that's not an atheist thing to say. That's not something for somebody that, you've got to believe in an afterlife. You've got to believe that God created you with a spirit and you're not just a body. It's interesting, some things that people just know intuitively and don't even realize what they're saying. But I've heard people say that kind of thing. His spirit was troubled within him. And then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac. Another interesting thing here in verse 4, Daniel says that they came to him and they spoke to him in their language, in Aramaic. And then he begins to write in Aramaic. From right here, from this point, over to 728, Daniel begins to write in Aramaic. He has learned their language, and it's interesting that these chapters have to do with the Gentile nations, and he begins to write these things in their language. So, obviously that's what God would have him to do, and it's a sign that these things, that God is working in the Aramaic nations. He's not just working God doesn't just speak Hebrew. God doesn't just speak English. God works with all people. He is the God of everybody. O king, live forever, they tell him. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. So it's pretty easy. I mean, we'll just say right now, it's pretty easy for somebody to say, well, I've got this thing I can't interpret, and we're pretty imaginative sometimes, and it's pretty easy for us to say, well, if you don't know what that means, I'll tell you what it means. I can think something up, right? And so these guys were used to doing that. They were pretty skilled at playing games with people and mincing words, and so, yeah, well, tell me what the dream was. I'll give you some kind of interpretation. Only it didn't work that way for them. That's what they were hoping. That's what they were expecting. That's kind of how this had always worked before. It was easy, but God had something different happen here. He had worked on King Nebuchadnezzar's mind, and maybe even since he saw how different Daniel was from the rest of his sorcerers, maybe that had got his wheels turning, right? I mean, I wonder if once I've seen the real deal, now the fake stuff doesn't seem so real to me. Y'all seen that kind of thing before? I kind of feel like that's probably what's happened with Nebuchadnezzar. He's seen the real deal. He's seen God working. He's seen God's wisdom. He heard the wisdom of God through Daniel, and suddenly these sorcerers and magicians seem like fakes. And so the king said this. He said, and the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. If you will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. Okay, so I hate to see this. This is a dangerous thing, but I'll tell you something. Being a liar is a dangerous deal. Putting yourself in a position where you're saying, I know things that only God knows, putting yourself in a position where you're interpreting things you have no idea what they mean, to pretend that you're in this position of power with the gods, and with them it was the gods, that you talk to these actual gods that are not real, and that they talk to you, and that you've got these ways of figuring things out. You know, being a fake and putting yourself in that position for gain is a dangerous thing. It's a dangerous game. And they've played this game, and and Nebuchadnezzar's caught up with them. He's on to them, and not only does he want an interpretation of the dream, now he wants them to tell him the dream. You can see how that would be a little tougher proposition, right? Now, how am I going to fake that? And I really think, and the Bible says here, he says the thing is gone from me, but I wonder if maybe he's playing them a little bit now. And I wonder if they know that, because they could probably, if they really believed he didn't know what his dream was, they could probably just tell him any old dream. But I think they knew that he's testing them. And so that's pretty sharp. And I think that God is working on Nebuchadnezzar's mind. And I think this is a bigger picture thing where he's not happy with the situation. He's not happy with these magicians. He's not happy with the sorcerers. He thinks they're a bunch of frauds. And he can see now in his mind how this is a threat to his kingship. This is a threat to his nation. If I'm getting all these lies from these guys are telling me things that are not true, they're false prophets, then I'm going to get some bad intel. How am I supposed to really trust anything if I'm seeing that these guys are lying to me? And I think that because we go on and he decides he's going to kill all of them. We're going to wipe, if y'all can't do any better than that, we'll just wipe all of you out and start over. But if you show me the dream and the interpretation thereof, you shall receive of me gifts and rewards and great honor. Therefore show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. And so he does this. He tells them, again, two very different sides. If you can't do it, I'm going to kill you. If you can do it, I'm going to give you lots of gifts and you're going to have everything you want. Now with this situation, and you know you're either going to die or be put in a great position, don't you know that they would do everything in their power to figure this out if they could? Absolutely, right? I mean, there is absolutely no doubt that if there was a possibility of them getting this information, they would have done it. They'd have crossed up as many chicken bones and threw as many dice and danced around and cut themselves around the old oak tree out there as all night long if they thought that was going to get them the answer. And notice they didn't even try to do that. You see that? Is it interesting to you, these people that claim to be able to do these things, when they heard something they knew they couldn't do, they couldn't fake, they couldn't lie about, they didn't even bother to go ask their gods, did they? I think that's very telling about people in general. People who would say they don't believe in God and they don't believe in the one true God. Deep down, I think everybody kind of knows there is one God. They don't want to believe it. They don't want him to be their God. They don't want to trust him. They don't want to serve him. But I think everybody's kind of got that feeling in their heart. God put it there. And these guys knew that their fake gods couldn't do this task. They don't even try. Even in the face of death, instead of going and dancing around the tree, they try to argue with the king. That's telling, because you don't argue with the king, do you? They would know that this man had set his mind and he was able to do exactly what he threatened to do. So they answered him again and said, "Let the king tell his servant the dream, and we will show the interpretation of it." And the king answered and said, "I know of a certainty that you would gain time, because you see the thing is gone from me." So you're just trying to gain time. You're just trying to wait until I'm not quite as mad. You're trying to wait and see if this will pass. You're trying to wait and see if I'll forget about it. I know, and he says, "I know for certain that you can't do this." That's why you're doing this. That's why you're acting this way. It's because, and that's why I think that he's been thinking about this a while now. This is his way of testing the situation, and he's basically telling them right here, I've been kind of wondering about you guys, and now I know for certain that y'all are a bunch of fakes. You can't do this. But they said, but if you will not make known unto me, oh, he said, yeah. If you'll not make known to me the dream, there is but one decree for you, for ye have prepared lying and corrupt words to speak before me, till the time be changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I will know that you can show me the interpretation thereof. And so there you are. He said, now I know for sure that you've just been preparing lying words for me. And I want to warn the congregation here tonight, be careful of the lying words out there. There are people just like these sorcerers who day by day prepare these lying, corrupt words to speak into our ears through media and through whatever sources they can. And they've got a big audience now. They've got a big bullhorn now in our day and time. They're not just talking to a few people. Now they can talk to millions of people at one time with their prepared lying words and corrupt words. Be careful that you don't take that counsel, because it's all around. Even poor old Nebuchadnezzar in his pagan Babylonian state, even he began to see the difference in the lying words and the truth of God. He still kept struggling with it, but he's beginning to see some things, isn't he? He's beginning to figure a few things out. And so he tells them again, there's only one thing that's going to happen to you if you don't get this done. So the Chaldeans answered before the king and said, there is not a man upon earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore there is no king, lord, or ruler that asks such things of any magician or astrologer or Chaldean. So now what they tell the king is, look, there's not anybody that can do this. Which is, they were right. There's not a human being on the planet who can do this. What are they doing to themselves? They're shooting themselves right in the, they're admitting that they have absolutely no insight into the Babylonian gods who supposedly speak to them and give them insight and showed them how to do their magician's tricks and all those kinds of things. They're admitting there's not anybody who can do that, and because there's not anybody who can do that, you're being very unreasonable, king. You're supposed to keep playing into our lies. You're not supposed to ask questions. What does that sound like? That sounds just like what we go through today, right? To the people who tell the lies and prepare the corrupt words. If you question it, you're not supposed to question that. You're not supposed to question that we're right just because we say we're right. Even if you make all the sense in the world, even if you reason it down, even if you're telling the truth, even if you can prove the truth, instead of accepting it, what do they say? You're not supposed to question that. Away with you. Don't question what we have to say. They don't want anything to be questioned. And the truth is that Satan himself, the author of all lies, when he lies, he can't defend his lies either. Because the truth is the truth, no matter what. And nobody can defend a lie, not before God for sure. So he says the king is unreasonable. No king has ever asked such a thing of us or anybody else. And it's a rare thing that the king requires, and there's none other that can show it before the king except the gods whose dwelling is not in flesh. And so they have no connection to these so-called gods. They're admitting that, right? A very different thing than our God, who we have a personal connection with, who Daniel had a personal connection with. So these guys are saying, I'm supposed to be this link between the spiritual and the flesh, but we have no real connection to these gods that we say we believe in. We'll say that these gods would be able to do this, but we have no way of knowing because we can't talk to him. And they don't talk to us. For this cause the king was angry and very furious and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So again, I think he's probably thought about this. He was furious about it. I think he feels like he's been played for years. He's realized that these guys were lying to him all along. They didn't really have any power or insight that he himself couldn't have. And so he's going to destroy all of them. Just kill them all. And so the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. And so Daniel and them weren't even there, but they're going to get kind of cast into the whole lot. They're going to be kind of gathered in with the rest of the liars, just because the king said, get rid of all of them. Only that wasn't God's plan, was it? So nothing that Daniel, and they didn't even know this was happening. So how could they protect themselves? I mean, they didn't even know what was going on. When the guy came to kill them, that's the first they knew about it. So they were going to be slain with the rest of these liars, except God, again, is intervening. All this is God's plan. In a pagan country, in an ungodly land of people that worship these false gods, God is still working. Then Daniel answered the council with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. And so when they got there to take him, Daniel basically, he asked him what was going on, but he talked to him again, not with rebellion, not with anger, not with haste, not with fear, but in the wisdom of God. Now, we can't talk to people without fear, without anger, without our emotions getting the better of us in situations where they're about to take us out and kill us, without the power of God. Unless we trust Him and we have faith in Him and He's working in our lives, I dare say we'd struggle to have anything smart to say, anything wise to say. It's hard enough to talk to you guys when nobody's going to kill me, right? If I knew y'all were going to come up here and string me up or something, it'd be hard to get words to come out, right? Much less anything smart. Daniel trusted God, and he was able to speak wisely. And so he asked him what was going on. And he answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree so hasty from the king? And Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. And so he just asked him. And again, Arioch didn't have to answer any questions, did he? He had a command from the king. These are just Hebrew children. They're just slaves. They're just coming out of this foreign country that we have taken. He didn't have to answer any questions from him. He could have just took them right out, right there, and killed them. That's what he was told to do. Daniel asked him, well, what's the hurry? What's going on? And Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time and that he would shew the king the interpretation. Again, an interesting thing in 16. So he didn't want to give the astrologers and the magicians any time, did he? They asked for time and no, tell me what's going on. Tell me right now. He didn't trust them at all. But Daniel comes in and goes before the king and asks for a little time and that he could do this thing. Well, the king obviously his mind has been worked on by God, hasn't it? He gives these Hebrew children a little time when he wasn't willing to give that to the others. He's not convinced in his mind that these Hebrew children are liars. He's not convinced in his mind that these Hebrew children's God is fake, is he? He's seen something. He felt something. Something about these guys, something that God put in his heart is different. Again, we can't quantify that, Christians, but we know that's true too, don't we? That there's just something that I can't really reason. I can't really, I can't reach inside me and pull my soul out. I can't reach out and grab God and hold Him and look at Him. But I just know something's different. I just know that He's real. I know that what He speaks in my heart is real. I know that the change in my life is real. There's just some things I just know is different than the world. And I know was different from before. And the king saw something different in Daniel. Even, I think, all the way back when he questioned him and found him 10 times better than all these others. And so he gives him just a little bit of time. And so Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they would desire mercies of the God in heaven concerning this secret. So Daniel is the one that the Bible says God gave the gift to interpret dreams. So Daniel could have thought, well, I'm the one that God has gifted with this particular gift. It's up to me. But notice he doesn't do that. He immediately, when given the time, and notice this too, he went before the king and told him, I can do this if you'll give me a minute. If you'll let me go and pray to my God, God will show me this thing. And God hadn't showed it to him yet. And notice that. Notice he is confident that God is going to reveal this dream. And this is a hard thing. The other guys didn't even want to try. Daniel had no idea what the king was dreaming. And imagine the king saying to you, I don't only want an interpretation, but I want you to tell me what the dream is, and I'm not going to give you any hints. It probably sounded just as daunting to Daniel as it did to these magicians, right? In his own self. And yet he was confident that his God, when he went home to pray, would give him the answer to this, that would give him this dream. That's faith, y'all. That's incredible faith. He was sure of it. And in his surety, guess what he does? He goes to Hananiah, his buddies, his Christian friends, and says, pray with me. Pray with me about this. I know that God can do it, and I need y'all's help in prayer. You know, it's amazing about prayer and faith, isn't it? Even though I've got faith that God can and will and does and can, you know, and he has done it before, and we need that faith. We've got to have that faith. It's important for us to have that faith in our prayers, but we still got to pray the prayers. And not only us, but we are to go to our friends and our neighbors, our other Christian people, and we're to be praying for each other about the same things, right? Something is a great burden on my heart. I need some people that I can go to and say, pray with me about this. And I'm not talking about just, you know, folks that I'm not sure might pray, and maybe they will, maybe they won't, maybe they'll say a word here or there. Y'all, we need at least a few people in our lives that we absolutely know have an audience with God, that we absolutely know will pray fervently for the thing, and that you know, the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. We need those kind of people in our lives. The only way we're going to have those kind of people in our lives is if we commit ourselves to being those kind of people. I need to be that kind of people for you, and you need to be that kind of people for me. And those kind of people are few and far between, because there's not enough of us that have committed ourselves to being that person. And so we've gotten to the point a lot of times where we're not even, we may even ask for a prayer request, but we need to know that these people are going to pray this prayer and that God is hearing these prayers. And again, we need to be that person. It's not just about saying, no, you're not that person. This is about me saying, I've got to be that person for you. And then you saying, you're going to be that person for me, and being that person for each other. And what we want is for an entire church to be those kind of people. For whoever you call up. If I made 5 calls and nobody answered, that the 6th call I made is still one of those kind of people. That's what we're looking for in the church, y'all. We need all of us to be those kind of people. Daniel knew he could depend on these guys to pray, and that God would hear their prayers. Now, it's very possible that a lot of these other Hebrew children have not been living this life. They've been doing all the things they shouldn't do. They didn't have the faith. They were fully integrated into the Babylonian society. They had made compromises. Daniel went to the ones he knew he could trust to be praying to the one true God, and that God was listening to him. that they would desire mercies of God, of the God of heaven concerning this secret. That it would be, and they knew this, that if God answered a prayer, this was by the mercy of God. That God's mercy is what we're looking for. That God's grace is what we're looking for. He didn't just say, you know, you know what he could have said in his heart? He could have said, you know, I was in this terrible situation. They took me captive. They were going to make me eat all these pork chops, and I said no. I drew a line. And God owes me this. And Daniel said, pray for mercy. Pray that God will be merciful to us, that he'll show me this secret that I know he can show me. But when he shows it to me, and think about, I know he's going to do it. I can show you the dream, King, and still saying, Lord, show me mercy and show me this dream. Had great faith and also great humility. That Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And we're going to find that not only does Daniel end up saving him and his companions, but he also asks for his enemies, that they not be destroyed as well. This is a man of God. This is not notice that this is not a New Testament man. This is not Peter or John. This is not somebody who walked with Jesus. This is Old Testament. This is eye for an eye. This is, if you kill somebody, then you die for it. This is Old Testament law that we tend to say, oh no, this is a totally different thing than grace. No, the men of God in all ages have lived by love and by faith. And yes, I'll tell you, I mean, the truth is that what we deserve is always death, right, for sin. And when somebody gets what they deserve, when justice is carried out and somebody pays for their sin, then that was the way it was. And there's no, you know, you don't say there was some injustice there, but what we're always looking for, though, is mercy and grace, right? And so you understand that when we sin, that we deserve death, but what we really want for us is mercy and grace. And so we look around us, and what we should want for everybody else is mercy and grace, knowing that what they deserve is death, and when they get it, they get it. We understand it. That's the way it was supposed to be, but we still ask for mercy and grace. This is what he's asking for them, just for them, mercy and grace. In faith, in humility, and we know that God answers the prayer. I think I'm going to stop right there. And we'll get into the dream and Daniel revealing the dream, if the Lord wills, next week. But we'll stop right there for now.